What we're here to talk about is what I think will be the buzziest, most talked about documentary of the spring. It's the documentary about WeWork, which is one of the great Icarus stories of modern business history. And it ties in everything from bubbles to venture capital to founder stories and startup culture. It's got it all. This is the first project from Forbes Entertainment. I've had the privilege of watching these two work. It's been a masterclass. We've got an Emmy nominee, Ross Dinerstein, who's the founder and CEO of Campfire, and he's produced more than 40 TV series and feature films, and Academy Award nominee, Jed Rothstein, who's, again, one of the top young directors in America. And so when you pair those two, it's all good. First, before we get into it, tell us about the title. It's very Dr. Strangelovian, if that's a word. Maybe I think it's really great, but maybe tell us what the title and what you guys thought about that, and how you came up with that.
Well, it is a bit Dr. Strangelovian, which is a fantastic film to be influenced by. I thought as we were exploring a bunch of different possibilities for the title, we wanted something that was easy to understand and easy for people to look at and see, get a sense of what the story they were going to hear was, but that also kind of was a little arresting. And so I thought that combination of a sort of clear but descriptive title, WeWork, or The Making and Breaking of a $47 billion Unicorn, tells you what the story is going to be about, but it also is that unusual construction that is referencing Strangelove, which was always one of my favorite films growing up.
And oddly, throughout the process, the hardest part of the filmmaking was actually coming up with the title. I think that was probably the most discussed thing. Jed is such a great director, and we had such a great team on this, including, your team from Forbes, that it was really smooth sailing. And the only thing that we really struggled with was coming up with the title, but I'm sure happy with the result.
Well, I got to sit in on some of those meetings, and again, kudos to somebody who writes cover lines and story headlines all the time. It's really hard, but I think what this title does do is both tell you what it's about, obviously, but also it has that playfulness. And I think the movie itself, I think that reflects the movie, because the movie is very serious, but it's also super fun. At Forbes, we're always writing about founding stories, and obviously how Miguel and Adam got together to start WeWork, is at the root of this company. But what drew you guys together? I mean, you're both coming at it from, you both had a lot of success, but how did you come together on this project?
Well, it really started with me. I'm actually from Texas, and so honored to be in South by. It's my favorite festival, and I've had such great experiences in the past. And I apologize about my dog barking. Welcome to the pandemic. But it really started with, I come from 3 generations of a real estate family, and I'm the one and only member of my family that's not in real estate. So it's always been in my bones and in my DNA. And I also am married to an interior designer, and we've always sort of marveled at WeWork's choices, the aesthetic choices, and the sense of community. And frankly, I built out a massive converted warehouse in Culver City here in LA, very much modeled after WeWork. It's 7,000 square feet with open spaces, and the idea is to create a community for my friends who are freelancers and writers and directors to just be around, just to be surrounded by the energy.
Ross work,
exactly. And mainly it's just as wanting a clubhouse to just have great creative flow and energy. So I really responded to a lot of the stuff that Adam and Miguel did and started out. Obviously, my business did not turn into what WeWork turned into. That's what always drew me to it.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. My $47 billion valuation is still in the works. So that's what drew me into it. And frankly, I've always been a huge fan of Jed's work. I love the China hustle. And we were lucky enough that Jed heard that we were doing this project, and he actually reached out to us through his agent. And that was, sort of a thing. We were actually talking to another filmmaker, and then when Jed reached out to us, we had a great meeting with him, and it was just sort of, the stars aligned where he was available. He had a really smart take on it. Plus we had access to what Forbes had been doing over the, last, I guess at that point, about 18 months covering it. So it really worked out well for us.
Well, Jed, you're a specialist in hard to get stories. I mean, you got your Oscar nomination tracking down Al Qaeda terrorists.
Yeah.
So what drew you? So what drew you to a documentary about WeWork and Adam Neumann?
Well, I first saw it as a great financial mystery, and I love those types of stories. I love actually doing stories about finance and economic issues because I think they help, as as you do with Forbes. I think they help tell us something about how we operate in society, and there's this sort of clarifying nature of money and business that helps explain what the emotional content behind what people are doing. So I was always interested in
the China Hustle, which Ross mentioned, right, is not a dance movie. It's about
right.
It's about securities
Right.
fraud in China. That's a hard story to tell, and Forbes, we called that the most important story of the year. So most important
Yeah, thank you for that.
documentary of the year. So you do know how to do that, and so here you come and you hear about. I mean, obviously,
So I thought it was a great financial mystery, and I thought Adam is he's a very charismatic and amazing character, and I also thought that it would be something that was a story about the hustle really of New York. And as a New Yorker, I don't often have a chance to do great New York stories, but this one was one, so that attracted me to it. And as we started making it and embarked on it, I actually found out there was a whole different side of it that really drew me in further. This notion of balancing the me and the we, and balancing the desire for community and togetherness versus this sort of selfish drive behind capitalism. And I think Adam and everyone at WeWork kind of struggled through that in different ways that are fun to watch. I mean, that's another thing about it. It was a story that is at once serious, as you said, but it's also fun. They do fun things, and there's joy in it. And it's always nice to be able to tell a story, especially in these times where there's just inherent joy in seeing some of the things that are going on.
No, it's a roller coaster of a story. Obviously, about a year ago, the Fire Festival documentary's got a lot of buzz, but this story has that similar flow, but the stakes are infinitely bigger, affecting literally millions of people and billions of dollars. So that's it all makes sense. Ross, you have experience. I mean, you did the Heaven's Gate docuseries over at HBO, so there is this culty kind of feeling that comes through a little bit. Do you see any similarities? And was that what drew you to this?
There are definitely some similarities. I mean, obviously the Heaven's Gate story is obviously much more tragic, and you want to talk about real stakes, but this idea of following someone blindly and is one thing, but it's really too, and you'll get it when you watch the doc, it's these things that people want to be inspired, people want to be motivated, they want to be a part of something bigger than the whole. And again, a lot of what Adam preached made sense, and I think it resonated with me. It was just sort of, in a way, he lost his way as he grew this tremendous messianic complex, and as the money just became silly, they lost their focus. And again, I think with Heaven's Gate, it's the same type of thing. They lost their focus. I think they started as sort of a group that had shared beliefs and really felt outside of society. And when they all got together, they had this like real connection of acceptance. And then again, they lost their way as they sort of got carried away and started to believe their own nonsense, frankly.
Well, Adam's such a good salesman. I mean, I think that's one of the core questions of the movie. Did he sell himself, or did he know what was going on? I mean, I met him twice. Once at the Under 30 Summit, the Forbes Under 30 Summit up in Boston, where he was a speaker, and I sat with him for about a half hour while he waited to get on stage. And he just had this. I mean, he has this giant, he's so big, and he's got this praying mantis kind of, but he's so joyous, and you can't help. I mean, Ross, you mentioned charisma. He's got it. Second time I got to host him at the Forbes 400 Summit on Philanthropy in New York, where Warren Buffett was one of the speakers, and he really wanted to meet Warren Buffett. And I actually sat next to him at lunch, and he really wanted to meet Warren. So afterwards, I grabbed. He was so, and generally that's not something I do. I mean, it's everybody wants to meet Warren, even at this very exclusive meeting. But sure, he talked me into it. I went and grabbed him and said, "Hey, Warren, this is Adam Neumann from WeWork." And Warren was like, "Okay, that's fine." but Adam was so, Adam was like, "I really want," and you wanted to please him. I mean, I saw it myself. I mean, you guys obviously got to know him very intimately through, the last year of just just looking at thousands of hours of footage and reading thousands of stories. Do you guys coming at it from that intensive outside perspective? I mean, Jed, maybe do you like him more or less, or what's your take on getting to know him through the journalistic process?
You know, I think I would like Adam, actually. I think he's a pretty amazing guy. I think he got carried away. I think there are people who are angry with him about the way things turned out, and justifiably so in many cases. And he got out over his skis. He drank too much of his own Kool-Aid and believed the hype and got greedy, frankly. But at the core of it, I think there's a gusto and a hustle that is attractive, and that's very much it's an immigrant story too. I mean, we haven't talked about that super consciously in discussing the film, but I think it's really important to remember that Adam is an immigrant, and Adam is part of this huge population historically and up through today of immigrants who come to this country, especially who come to New York and who hustle. And Adam didn't come here with a trust fund and a Harvard education. He kind of hustled and brought this stuff together. And I think in the process of doing that, there's this very American component of that, which is sort of fake it till you make it, and there's a fine line between aspirationally talking about things that don't yet exist and making them happen and just lying to people. And I think if you cross that line and you cross it too far, you get in trouble. You saw this with Elizabeth Holmes in the blood, Out for Blood in Silicon Valley, right? And you see it sometimes, people just go overboard and it's no longer just selling, it's kind of lying. But I think in his heart, Adam was trying, at least when he started, he was trying to do something that was worthy of being done, and that's important to bring people together. And I think it just spiraled. But I think I was more interested in him when I finished making this rather than less.
Yeah, and I agree. I think when we started this, Jed and I were convinced that there would be, sort of federal indictments or criminal charges brought against him, because I probably went into this thinking that he was a white collar criminal, and he's not. And, at the end of the day, like he, as far as we know, he played by the rules and people enabled him and he asked for money and people said yes. And he built his business up and people were there. He had a board. He had people that could have probably prevented it. And, but they didn't. So, he had opportunity and he took it. And that is very much the American dream.
Well, that's also why this is an important story, because, it would kind of unwind in some ways like your typical, financial fraud kind of story. But to your point, it was not fraud. He was playing within crazy rules. And that speaks to something that's much, much bigger. It's a much bigger story in that way.
Right. Something about the rules that maybe should be discussed.
And these ideas of valuations on companies that don't make money has always been sort of fascinating. I sold a piece of my company about 2 years ago, and I even got advice from people saying, the fact that your company's profitable is actually hurting you. And I said, we have to unpack that. And it was explained to me.
That'll take care of that.
Right. You can't, the idea that people value companies on an idea of a dream and not actualities is an interesting concept. When we announced this film, I had a few friends in finance reach out to me unsolicited to explain, like, I hope you understand speculative valuation and what's wrong with it. And I think, over the last 24 months, a lot of these sort of failed IPOs, it all comes down to it, that the media makes them out to be these like super profitable companies. But once you sort of look under the hood, you realize that, and we use the term, they're hemorrhaging money. And WeWork is one of those.
Well, they're encouraged to hemorrhage money. And that's also part of why, Adam is not your typical hero or villain, because the system was telling him, you want to be super duper rich, grow and don't worry about profitability. And
including his lead investor, who's manages the biggest fund in the world, was telling him, be crazy, don't be smart.
You're not crazy enough.
And how do you achieve, and we talk about this in the film, how do you achieve the sorts of gains, when you have that much of an outsized investment? In order to make it pay off, you need to have outsized gains, and you can't achieve those through, timid and conservative business strategies. You need to sort of shoot for the stars. Obviously, it spun out of control and it didn't work out, and it got extravagant and crazy in ways that were unnecessary. And I think the irony is that the sort of most salacious bits of selfish behavior and things that really grab headlines were relatively small amounts of, they involved relatively small amounts of money in the scheme of WeWork. But those are the things, the self-dealing and the, selling the company trademark back to the company and buying buildings and renting them back. And these kind of things that investors look at rightly and say, hey, this is messed up, man. I don't want to be part of this. But they were relatively small potatoes compared to what was going on with the overall scheme of WeWork and who invested in it and how much money they were hoping to pull out of it.
But the reason they resonated, Jed, I think, is because the whole company was built on this idea of connection and community, and they weren't very community actions. I mean, and that speaks to a larger question for you. I mean, a great film, you can either be good or you can be lucky. You guys were both, because COVID, doing this in the middle of this pandemic, I mean, it underscored the idea of community for the last year. Has been front and center with the entire world, and the idea of connection.
Totally.
So Jed, when you were making this, how was that playing in your head?
It's a good question, because it became, for me, from very early on, for myself and Ross and Danny, who was my right hand on a lot of this, the production side. It became a really central question, even from the first interviews that we did, because it became clear that even a few months into the pandemic, we were all very, very hungry for community. We were hungry for being together. We realized how much something as sort of normal and pedestrian as the office would be missed, and how much we missed being around each other. And I think the grand experiment of WeWork, the we side of it, the not selfish side of it, to bring everyone together, is something that really became central to the story as we spoke to more and more people. And I think that to me is what really made the film work at the end of the day. It's what gave it this emotional tension. It's that you want to be with people, and even the people in the story who were scarred by some of Adam's actions at the end of the day, emotionally scarred, or financially in some cases, they liked this idea of coming together. The dream that they bought into was very real for them, even if at the end of the day it didn't bear out, or it wasn't real for some of the people at the head of the company. It was very real. It was a very real experience and very meaningful experience. And I think in the midst of COVID, we see that coming out of this, whatever happens with WeWork, whatever happens with office culture, and there are a lot of questions around that, we realize that we do need to be together. We do need to have these communities and these bonds. They're hardwired into who we are as human beings.
Well, similar question, or kind of related question. You guys started making this film at the beginning of the, worst pandemic in 100 years, and you finished it, the entire thing, in the middle of a pandemic. There's history there. How did you make this? I was privy to a little bit of it, and during my interview, it was the precautions, the distancing. I can't imagine that was only for the X hours we were together. I cannot imagine. What was that like?
I will give a lot of credit to our production team. They really figured it out. We started shooting this in June of 20, and we're finishing it as it's finished now, and it's one of the quicker turnarounds of any feature doc I've ever done, and it turned out great. We had great partners with Olive Hill and with Forbes and our team in general, but it was challenging. And I will say this: the funny thing is Randall, you and I've never met in person, which I feel like we're friends. Jed, you and I've had one meal together, and yet we are producing partners and made this great film. And I think having this doc bring us all together did sort of fill a lot of the loneliness that the pandemic caused. And, Zoom technology was really helpful, and having a really nimble team and creative team that figured things out. One of our biggest interviews took place in my office in Culver City, and Jed was in Brooklyn, and you would never know in a million years how that Jed wasn't there, because it was such an emotional and beautifully shot interview. And it's pretty remarkable what we were able to do and what people can do now with technology.
it's the spirit of filmmaking in general and of documentary filmmaking in particular, which I think is great. You just respond to challenges. You adapted the production. You saw, Randall, how we did it in some cases. You figure out the difficulties before you and you find ways around them. And it's actually one of the things that always drew me to filmmaking, for years and years, is this building a team and building a community. I mean, it's the kind of irony of it is I love working with teams and with my crew and Ross and his, and everybody coming together. And the greatest days that I had in the summer when we finally could open up and start shooting again is when we were on the set. The joy of like coming out of the Zoom meetings and everything, and they're as helpful as they are, but the joy of like really getting into a set with my crew and working together, even with all the precautions and the masks and the tests and the distance and everything that made it very unusual. Just the physically working together was so rewarding. And I think that, the ability to have done this film in the course of the pandemic, to me, was a real gift. And I feel very privileged and lucky to have been able to continue working on this mostly throughout the pandemic.
I mean, the edit bay was in the backyard of the editor's house, and Jed would send pictures where he's,
right
10 feet behind the editor on a back patio outdoors.
Yeah, we had a COVID edit station out in Sam's backyard in New Jersey.
It again, the poignancy again of about a major documentary about community being done in this way. You could definitely feel it. You could feel it in the filmmaking, and again, it does underscore why this is an important movie right now. We have about 2 minutes left. One more question for each of you. Jed, if there's one thing, it's the cutting room floor questions. There's one thing that's not in the doc that you think might be interesting to share with audiences, let me know. And then Ross, I want to ask you how and when we're going to get to see this.
Great.
There were a lot of, Adam was a really colorful character, and there were crazy stories about him that are in the film, and there are some that just aren't because they were a little too hard to, pull together and fact check, or they were just too much. But, the guy lived in a very entertaining way, and there's some of that's on the floor, but I'm sure his story will carry on, and we'll get to see more of him in the future.
It definitely comes through. And yes, that's part of, again, you have strong characters here, and that's part of why, it's such a great doc. Ross, when can we see it?
The film will be launched on Hulu on April 2nd. So wherever you get your Hulu, check out our great film.
It's going to be talked about. It has that feel, and again, it has it because it's got a much larger message. It's a heck of a ride, but it also makes you think about startups, about business, about people, and that's the key to storytelling. So credit to you guys. Congratulations again, doing this so fast and putting out the incredible. As we see by South by selecting it. It's a great piece. I'm proud to be affiliated with it, and I'm proud of you guys for what you did in the time and the conditions you did it. So congrats.
Thanks Randall. Thanks to South by. We're really excited to be premiering.
The best. Wish we were in Austin eating queso and drinking Shinerbach. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.